the captors searched hundreds of female robots in an attempt to find the one who had already awakened. Originally, during the recent simulation battle, the developers noticed something suspicious. While reviewing the footage, the female robot clearly dodged the bullets, yet she fell to the ground, screaming in pain. Realizing that the female robot had been sent for repairs, the developers immediately understood that something was wrong. He quickly activated a level 1 alarm. They even deployed all guards to capture her. Why did the robot develop self-awareness? And what had happened behind all of this? Today, let's take a look together at another masterpiece by Train to Busan director Sang Ho-yeon. The story begins. In the ruins, Jingi suddenly opened her eyes. She saw a battle-type robot slowly approaching. Jingi immediately opened fire. Then she looked for cover to maneuver. After easily dealing with the trouble, she shot a grappling hook at a robot behind her. Several bullets fired out, and all the robots were destroyed. Just as Jingi was reporting the situation to her teammates, suddenly, it turned out to be a mechanical dog sent by the enemy. It had more powerful firepower and was equipped with thermal imaging. The enemy was completely exposed in its sight. The mechanical dog found Jingi and launched a fierce attack. Jingi immediately changed her position. The mechanical dog used its leg wheels to chase after her. Then it made a dazzling appearance with a drift. Faced with the mechanical dog's fierce assault, Jingi had to run. As she passed through a pipe, she shot it to shatter it. Oil spilled out from inside. The mechanical dog behind her got drenched. However, the oil made it even faster due to lubrication. Just then, a grenade came crashing in. It ignited into flames upon contact with the mechanical dog. It seemed that victory was assured, but the mechanical dog was equipped with a fire extinguishing feature. Jingi quickly dodged. The mechanical dog searched everywhere in pursuit. Unbeknownst to it, Jingi was hiding right above its head. She shot the grappling hook in advance and was ready to evacuate at any time. At this moment, the mechanical dog found her position. Jingi escaped smoothly. However, the mechanical dog was struck by a falling metal frame. Just as Jingi was about to fire her weapon, she was distracted for some unknown reason. A robot behind her immediately knocked her down. At this moment, Jingi looked at her fingers. She was shocked to discover mechanical tissue. While Jingi was still in shock, her brain suddenly crashed, and the battlefield vanished as well. Originally, everything that had just happened was just a test. Jingi was the strongest combat robot developed by the base. For some reason, she had never been able to pass the final test. Thus, this failed prototype had its mechanical tissue removed. Then, the personnel at the base reported the robot development progress to the higher-ups. Here, it was noted that the current year was 2135 in the future. The Earth's environment had deteriorated, and resources were depleted. It had become uninhabitable for humans. As a result, all humans had migrated to space stations. However, not long after, 3 space stations announced their independence as nations. They even named their new nation Adrian to expand their territory. This nation launched attacks on other space stations. The other space stations wouldn't passively take the hits, so they formed a united military to combat Adrian. But after 40 years of fighting, neither side had gained a clear victory. However, when the war first broke out, an outstanding mercenary named Jingi emerged. Her team was unstoppable in battle. However, 5 years later, during a mission to destroy Adrian's fuel supply, the entire team perished. She was also seriously injured and became a vegetative state. To continue utilizing her abilities, the base obtained permission from Jingi's mother to clone her brain and convert it into data. They then developed a robot that carried her combat skills. The scientist in charge of the development was Jingi's daughter Shuxian. However, it had been developed for 10 years, and they still couldn't find the reason for Jingi's failure to pass the tests. The higher-ups had long lost patience. They believed that continuing to develop Jingi-type robots would only waste resources. Moreover, her past achievements were no longer relevant. If it weren't for her failure in the last mission, the war would have ended by now. But Shuxian repeatedly pleaded after hearing this. She insisted that the development would surely succeed. The higher-ups reluctantly gave her a few more days. Immediately after, Shuxian approached Jingi, who was left with only her head. She wanted to ask her why she always stopped at the last moment of the test. Unexpectedly, Jingi yelled. She couldn't comprehend human speech at all. Shuxian had to destroy the failed prototype. Afterward, she and her assistant left the laboratory. They casually discussed why Jingyi became a mercenary. It turned out that Xuxian had a tumor on her lung. When she was young, the treatment required a lot of money. Being a mercenary brought in quick and substantial income. That's why Jingyi decided to go to war, and she underwent surgery. On the same day her mother became a vegetative state. Sometimes, Xuxian even felt that her mother's condition was her fault. Perhaps her mother regretted going to war for her daughter. At this moment, the assistant suggested asking the robot. Xuxian thought this made sense. However, she had to see the doctor soon. Jingyi hoped the assistant could help ask. Then, Xuxian found the doctor. The doctor stated that her cancer had metastasized. Thus, the surgery from her childhood was in vain. She now had 3 months left to live. If necessary, they could clone her brain in advance. It could then be placed into a mechanical body. However, Xuxian thought that Type A and Type B bodies were too expensive, and the cheap C-type had no human rights. Yet, the Type C option could provide compensation to the family. Their grandmother had signed a Type C contract back then. That's why her mother was cloned numerous times. Afterward, a new Jingyi robot was manufactured. She was taken for testing. Unexpectedly, the director wanted to try something new. He ordered to first shoot her in the leg. Seeing Jingyi fall to the ground and howl in sorrow, Xuxian's eyes filled with tears beside her. But the director held a higher position, so she had no say in the matter. As the injured Jingyi faced the attacking robots, she quickly found herself powerless to fight back. At this moment, a signal that had never occurred before appeared in Jingyi's brain. Then, surprisingly, she regained the strength to fight. The director wanted to figure out what the signal was. Unexpectedly, the robot shot Jingyi in the head. The director could only review the previous data. He believed that this unknown signal was the key to success. Not only that, Jingyi's mechanical body had also completed its upgrade. As long as they could find the unknown signal again, their development could succeed. Just as the director was about to inform the good news with the higher-ups, his brain also crashed. It turned out he was a robot as well. At this moment, the higher-ups asked Xuxian about the development progress. Xuxian shared the good news. However, the higher-ups said there was no need to proceed, because Adrian had signed a ceasefire agreement with the United Army. They would no longer engage in battles. Combat robots were no longer needed. But there was no need to worry. The company could pivot to other business ventures. So now they had to see what type Jingyi could be transformed into. Xuxian collapsed in despair and left. At this moment, the higher-ups reactivated the director's program. He was unaware of what had just occurred, because he didn't know he was a robot as well. Then, the director, not wanting to end the development, wanted to find out what that signal was. He ordered someone to cut off Jingyi's arm. However, the unknown signal didn't appear. The director was furious but had no solution. Xuxian refused to accept that her mother would be transformed. She ran to the testing site and cried. While glancing at the data, Xuxian discovered that the assistant had taken her mother's brain out. She went over to check the situation. The assistant became flustered and spoke incoherently upon seeing her. She realized the assistant was doing something wrong. Xuxian barged in directly and saw her mother being desecrated. She wished she could strangle the assistant. Unexpectedly, the assistant said it was the higher-ups' decision. Jingyi would definitely be popular as a combat icon. Moreover, the Type C contract allowed anything to be done. The family had also agreed to this at the time. Hearing this, Xuxian fell silent. She arrived at the laboratory in a daze. Xuxian encountered the director, who was also saddened. He didn't want his years of hard work to end this way. Seeing Xuxian arrive, the director stated that tomorrow would be the final test. Regardless of success or failure, Jingyi would have her combat data deleted. She would be transformed into a household robot. Xuxian understood all of this. She came to Jingyi and prepared to talk to her. Surprisingly, the first thing Jingyi asked was how her daughter's surgery went. At this moment, the signal appeared again. Xuxian, already in tears, stated that it went smoothly. Jingyi cried and replied that was good. Her daughter had given her a pendant before the surgery, but she accidentally lost it on the battlefield. So Jingyi had always felt guilty about it. Her daughter had specifically instructed her to keep it for a lifetime. Only after hearing this did Xuxian understand why Jingyi always failed the tests. Because in the end, Jingyi would always look at the pendant given by her daughter. And this unknown signal was Jingyi's longing for her daughter. The next day, Xuxian stated that she would personally operate the final test. After everyone else left, she deleted the unknown signal. Then she whispered something in Jingyi's ear. Soon, the test began. Jingyi once again engaged in a melee with the robots. The final test failed just like before. The director left in disappointment. However, he suddenly sensed something was wrong. So the director turned back to check the surveillance footage. He discovered that Jingyi had actually dodged the bullets, and that her injuries and fall were all an act. The director immediately ordered a full-scale capture of Jingyi. On the other side, Jingyi knocked out the staff member, who was trying to take her away. Then she escaped into a warehouse. She gazed at the countless versions of herself around her. Jingyi was utterly shocked. Just then, the robots sent to capture her arrived. Jingyi hurriedly blended in with them. She punched her opponent while the robot was unprepared. Then, she delivered a flying kick that knocked it down. The other robots quickly rushed over to help. Jingyi immediately began to fight. However, the combat robots were also very powerful, and their numbers were simply too overwhelming. Jingyi gradually found herself at a disadvantage. She fought back fiercely, but had her arm yanked off. Jingyi let out a terrible scream. On the other side, Xuxian was rushing over, and the reinforcements called by the director were also on their way. Meanwhile, Jingyi grabbed a nearby laser arm and knocked down a robot, but she was then grabbed by other robots, lifted by her neck. At this critical moment, Xuxian arrived just in time to shut down the robots. She told Jingyi not to be afraid. She was there to help. Jingyi remembered hearing Xuxian's voice in her dreams. Soon, she let down her guard. At this moment, the support troops had arrived. They cautiously entered the warehouse to search. After knocking down Jingyi, they began to report the situation. Meanwhile, Xuxian pretended to be injured. She was helped out of the warehouse by the robots. On the other side, as the troops examined Jingyi's body, they discovered that her brain had been removed. They immediately retrieved the surveillance footage and found that Xuxian had replaced Jingyi's brain with a robot. They had just escaped right in front of them. At this moment, Xuxian had already taken Jingyi onto a train. They were preparing to escape from there to a place where they wouldn't be controlled. Unexpectedly, the director had been waiting there for a long time. Jingyi was ready to step forward to take him down. However, the director shouted that he would kill her daughter if she moved. Xuxian hurriedly informed him that she had already deleted all memories related to her and her daughter. The director asked why she would do such a thing. Xuxian replied that it was to give her freedom. Jingyi charged forward immediately. She kicked the opponent away and rushed to Xuxian's side. However, the director quickly got back up. When he saw his exposed mechanical tissue, he was shocked and asked himself why he was a robot. Xuxian replied that he was merely a toy for the higher-ups. Upon hearing this, the director immediately became angry. As a fellow robot, the director had immense combat power. The two engaged in a fierce battle on the train. At this moment, the support troops arrived and began firing inside. Jingyi quickly hid. However, since Xuxian was also in the car, the robots stopped shooting when they detected living beings inside. Then, as the two trains intersected, they jumped down. They approached the spot where Jingyi was hiding. Suddenly, the two sides began to grapple with each other. Unexpectedly, the director shot a grappling hook that struck Jingyi. Jingyi was instantly subdued by him. Xuxian stepped forward to help, but was thrown aside. Seeing Xuxian on the ground, Jingyi retaliated angrily. She saw the director pick up his gun again, and quickly blocked with her robotic body. Then, she kicked him out of the train car, but the director shot a grappling hook back at her. At this moment, the train collided with a nearby building, causing it to shake. Yet the two continued to fight fiercely. At this point, Xuxian looked outside the train. She noticed another train approaching from the opposite direction. The two trains collided, sending Jingyi to the edge of her train. Seeing an opportunity, the director raised his gun to shoot. Xuxian hurriedly picked up the gun and shot out a grappling hook. She pulled Jingyi into a safe train car. However, the director wasn't so lucky. The car he was in couldn't withstand the fall and plummeted into the abyss. At this moment, Xuxian was nearly bleeding out. Jingyi wanted to find something to save her. However, Xuxian grabbed her and urged her to leave. She hoped her mother could live freely in the future. Jingyi was stunned for a moment. Then she leaned in to say goodbye to Xuxian. It was just like the way she had said goodbye to her daughter. when she was young. Afterward, Jingy jumped off the train car and ran. When she reached the mountaintop and looked ahead, she realized she was finally free. The film came to an end. The fight scenes in the movie were exciting and thrilling. The special effects were also very cool. The mother-daughter relationship depicted was touching. Designing the director of the Research Institute as a robot was indeed a refreshing idea. However, the plot was clearly unreasonable. The logic didn't hold up to scrutiny. The toys created by the higher-ups could fight evenly with the protagonist. So why spend 10 years developing Jingy? It was pointless after the battles had ended. Moreover, forcing the director to become the villain at the end was simply too contrived. If you enjoy my channel, please subscribe to my channel. Your support is the greatest encouragement for me.